Welcome back to the Tuesday weekend, where we like to pour your shot of Fireball into a shot glass right out of the dishwasher and then stand back and watch what happens. Yeah, take that. That's what you get for ordering Fireball. Anyway, today we are discussing the Old Fashioned. On Team Brandy, we have Alan. On Team Whiskey, we have Nick. Now let's play the feud. All right, the first question for both of you, and Al, as the visiting team, you get to play first. Is there a liquor, well, I guess a brown liquor that I would be wrong in using for an Old Fashioned? Like, is whiskey incorrect?
No, it's, if you're making a pie chart, it's still a noticeable slice on there. But I'd say I think it's seriously probably 95% of Old Fashions here are brandy, but most of that remaining 5% would be some form of whiskey, usually a bourbon rather than just a straight whiskey. But we get that too. And like Nick, I mean, I'll make whatever anybody orders. I'm not the one drinking it. It's fine with me. But,
right.
Yeah, I mean, not anything, Brian. I wouldn't make one with, creme de cacao. but certainly any kind of, say, various whiskeys, people ask for Jim Beam or Makers or, another bourbon. I will occasionally just get it, make a rail whiskey Old Fashioned. It's not the norm, but it's not an unheard of request either.
I'm not sure I've ever just said okay to like the Jim Beam or a Jack for my Old Fashioned. No, even if I'm going bourbon, I will take a nicer bourbon.
It's out here. It's always which bourbon would you like? I would also like to point out as many brandy Old Fashioned as you make. I mean, shockingly enough, in San Diego, I make a grip of Old Fashions every single night. It's become a go-to drink for pretty much 21 to 61. I mean, old people order them, kids order them.
I say we're mostly a highball bar. I mean, most of the week I'm mostly making rum and cokes and whiskey sours and vodka lemonades. But there's a smattering of Old Fashions all weekend, and we make dozens of them every Friday night because it's been the Friday night special for decades.
I mean, for the opposite of the Old Fashioned out here, for the most part, I mean, we do a lot of cocktails like every bar, every place out here, but I also probably pour my body weight in Tito's every week.
Oh, yeah. We go through a case of Tito's every night.
We've gotten down to 3 vodkas. I have Grey Goose, I have Tito's, I have Belvedere. Don't you have this? I'm like, no, we don't sell.
We have Goose and Kettle, but it's almost all Tito's that people want.
Yeah.
I'm really glad that we've largely moved past the era of every vodka doing every flavor they can just to take up space on the shelf. Yeah. I don't need 3 different kinds of vanilla vodka, thank you.
Or birthday cake or marshmallow or caramel or
cotton candy vodka. You mean a sugar flavored liqueur? Cool.
Yeah.
Popcorn, bubble gum was one of my favorites for a while there. Yeah.
Fruit Loops and Sweet Tarts both were on the list.
I remember those. Yeah. Anyway, back to the
brand. So and Trae looks completely bored. Sorry, Trae. So, all right, the next question is actually on the sugar itself. So, white sugar, brown sugar, demerara, sugar cubes versus granular. Why not simple syrup? Nick, I'm going to start with you on this one.
First thing is, sugar is what goes in the drink. The original makings of this drink were made without chemically refined sugar that we have now. So molasses. The sugar back then actually dissolved a lot better in water than it does now. Moving forward from that, granulated sugar, there's brown sugar, there's demerara. They all have slightly different flavors. Demerara is the one that is favored or popularized in all the recipes I read from the late and early century and such. And that's just going to be a cruder, darker sugar that's going to have a little bit more of, say, a molasses flavor to it. Again, these are all going to be in cubes and such, hence using the soda to melt them to melt the sugar. The simple syrup thing has come into play just because you can do it faster. You'll know what I mean, Alan. Hey, I need 10 Old Fashions.
Yeah.
You're there for a minute. The simple syrup, for me anyway, has replaced the sugar. I have no problems using the sugar. If I have it, it's great. But my current position told us to just go away from the sugar and use the simple syrup. It mixes in better. It still gives it that sweetness, but you don't have the granular stuff, and you get a lot more consistency from drink to drink to drink.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Because it's not about how effectively you dissolve the sugar, because the sweet is just in there.
It's the sugar and the bitters that make it an Old Fashioned and not just a whiskey sweet or brandy sweet or whatever. But I don't know how much it matters. I've never seen anybody use brown sugar. I guess you could.
That would be interesting. I've never really done a brown sugar either.
The bar where I first learned to make them back in the late 80s, we used strictly, powdered sugar, confectioner's sugar, the very finely ground stuff. dissolved easily. Now we just use the basic. We keep bulk sugar around at a pinch. You can just rip open a little packet like you pour in your coffee.
Yeah, I've done that before too.
You're right. Simple syrup would be quicker and easier. We just, for whatever reason, at my bar, are in the habit of using it, but I can't imagine it would affect the flavor that much.
The most important thing I'd say is the amount of sugar.
Yeah.
So what I'm using is basically a half ounce of simple syrup. That is what I pretty much translated to a sugar cube, which is the original measurement is just a cube of sugar. And that really hasn't changed.
Right? Sure.
And Demerara cubes are never really super square.
They're irregular.
Yeah.
Well, any other sugar thoughts before I move on to the
too much sugar ruins it.
Yeah, so it's going to be a sweet drink anyway. Yeah. You don't want to,
you don't want to really you don't want to really cotton candy it up, That's
right. I agree.
Well, and my next question was about the cherries, the maraschino versus the fancier cocktail or Luxardo cherries. Again, because the maraschino is really rather sweet just on its own, where the Luxardo's not quite as much. Do you have a cherry preference? And I'll start with you on this one, Al.
I mean, the maraschino is sort of this, I guess, the industry standard, at least around here. What I don't do that a lot of my friends and coworkers do is even pour some of the juice into the drink. Again, I don't think it needs that much sweetness. I know people who say a lot of people do it, but no, if I'm going to muddle one in the bottom with some orange and then garnish on top, to me, that's plenty of cherry in there.
You just gave me an idea, like how people will order a pickleback. I want a maraschino back. Yeah, just give me a little shot of that straight sugar out of that gallon jug.
That is horrible.
Yeah.
Just horrible. Let's go about cherries really quick. So back when they first started, maraschino cherries were actually in Europe were considered cherries that were pretty much in liquor. That's why they're called maraschino cherries. They started doing them here in America in the late 1800s, early 1900s. But instead of putting them in liquor, they were putting them in sugar and they were dyeing them red. They were actually Queen Anne cherries back in. Now they're basically Bing cherries that they use and dye red. The other version is the Luxardo maraschino cherry, which is actually done in a syrup. A maraschino, when you muddle it, is going to break open, and that's about it. The Luxardos, when you muddle those, are kind of like a juice center fruit chew where you bite into it and juice goes everywhere. I mean, you want to make something too sweet, muddle a Luxardo cherry, and you could put absinthe in there and all you're going to taste is Luxardo cherry. It's come to the point now where instead of muddling when we get to that, but the cherries and everything, is that the alcohol is going to leach the sugar out of the cherry instead of forcing it into the alcohol. Mm-hmm. So that's why there's the huge popularity outside of Wisconsin where everyone uses the Luxardo cherries versus the maraschino cherries, because again, you're not really muddling that much anymore. It's kind of speeding up the drink, but you're still getting the same desired result where the sugar's coming out.
There was one restaurant in Manhattan that I worked at briefly, and then it closed, unfortunately, that was branding their own cherries for the bar. And I thought that was really cool. Actually preserving all of that themselves. And sure, it was a 4-month process. I think that's cool to do it in-house.
That is
all
right.
So let's look at the orange for a moment. Fresh. Nick, the recipe you sent me had dehydrated orange on it, which I will say I got home last night and at a 170-degree oven just kind of made myself some nice little orange crisps here.
Wow.
That being said, I'm not a fan of the dehydrated orange thing. It's something I'm being made to do at work right now, and it is really popular around town. I see it everywhere when people make old fashions using a dehydrated orange. The fact of the matter with the dehydrated orange is you are now adding an orange sugar cube to your drink. The alcohol is going to reconstitute the orange back to normal. At the same time, it's just going to take out all the fructose. There's no more orange juice. There's a little bit of orange flavor in that, but not a lot. I'm not a fan of that part of the new version of the old fashioned. Personally, I had my kitchen doing oranges as low as the oven would go for about an hour or so until the outside turned just a slightly burnt orange. It would just caramelize the fructose and then it would release less because it was still there. It just, I think it made a completely better drink, had a lot more complex flavor.
Al, are you seeing dehydrated oranges in Wisconsin?
No, I mean, people are very traditional here, very set in their ways. People want the same drink they've been ordering for decades. I mean, I have some of the same people I've been making them for 30 years, and they don't want a lot of change. No, it's just your basic. Yeah, I mean, depending on who cut the fruit, if it's if somebody cut them crazy thick, I'd muddle half a slice if it's cut thin enough. If not, I might bust out just like a quarter of it if somebody left it too thick, because you don't want a ton of the juice in there.
Yeah, see now in the old school ones when I'd make them, because no one did slices, it was always orange wedges.
Okay.
So like this, little orange wedge that you put on the corner of a drink, and then there'd be a cherry, and then you put the sugar in, and you muddle it. And
I mean, there's no doubt that it's adding some flavor that not everybody prefers. I wouldn't say a lot. I'd say maybe 1 or 2%, but it's certainly a handful of times a year I get somebody specifically request no muddle. Again, they're still going to take the sugar and the bitters because that's what makes it all fun. But and they'll take the garnish on top, but they don't want all the stuff on the bottom.
I can see that. A lot of places will just use an orange zest.
Oh,
You get the orange oil and flavor in there, but that doesn't add any sugar to it at all. And it's a kind of a different flavor. And I've just watched and seen all these things kind of rotate through as we've moved on.
I am sure there's somebody out there who is flaming an orange peel over the drink as the last step.
Yep, there's that.
I'm sure.
Let's light the orange oil on fire and get rid of all the flavor completely.
But it looks cool. But all right, so what about blood oranges?
Way too bit. I mean, Alan, what do you think? If blood orange in one of those would really kind of...
Yeah, well, and it's the presentation. I mean, people are put off. We've gotten them in a couple times when that's all we could get, and people are immediately like, whoa, what are you putting in there? So people already convince themselves just when they see it that they're not going to like the way it tastes. So there's already a predisposition to saying, no, that's not what I was expecting, and I don't like it.
So then I suppose my next thought of a Paloma old-fashioned hybrid using grapefruit instead of orange is just totally off.
Yes, that would be completely off because, again, you're looking for the sweetness from the citrus.
I'll be the first to say I would not try that drink, but I'll take a sip, but I'm not going to order it.
I'm like, Josh, you would try everything. We already know that.
I will. I mean, I might immediately dislike it, but I will try it. All right, so I forgot to nab the extra muddler from work last night, but I have a citrus reamer, the blunt end of a sturdy wooden spoon, or the tamper from my Venomix blender. Any suggestions for anyone at home who might not have the proper muddling equipment who might want to try this? What a good substitute might be?
In a pinch, as long as it's clean. I've muddled with the bottom of a Tabasco bottle, or anything sort of.
That's a good shape.
Yeah, you need something flat
small enough to fit in the glass. And
yep, that'll work just fine. Just something that's flat or slightly rounded that's going to fit in the glass, and you can put a little pressure on. Also, I think Alan will agree with me on this as well. A lot of bartenders muddle way too long.
Oh yeah, you just want to bless.
Yeah, you're just trying to get some flavor into that drink. You're not trying to turn it into a paste that's going to be like used for a sauce later. Even when like you watch the Bacardi commercial with the mojitos, the guy's like sitting there muddling like this, and I'm like, okay, you're done. And then he keeps going for another minute and a half. And it's
especially mint, you don't have to crush the thing. You just need to open it up, and it's good.
But again, like when you're muddling these drinks, you're just trying to get flavors introduced into the alcohol. You're not really trying to make a new sauce, so to speak. And a lot of bartenders I see, it's like, okay, you could stop, a minute ago. You're good.
Well, yeah, and thank God it doesn't need that. I can't even think of how far I would fall behind. On a busy
just
Friday.
Like go, and that's it. You're done.
If I catch a break, I will pre-muddle. I'll have a dozen of them all lined up, just ready to add the stuff because I know we're going to go through them. But most of the time, we just make them on the fly, and I can't imagine having to spend that extra minute per drink.
Trae, is there anything you muddle in making ice cream, or is that just too small a process and you need to think bigger than that?
Not really. As you said, it is too small of a process. Most of what we do is either blending or infusing. Sometimes we'll infuse some aromatics like a mint, like a bay leaf into the cream. Otherwise, it's a blend or a chop. Maybe if I was making like little tiny pints at a time in ice cream, muddling might make sense. But when you're making 10, 20, 30 gallons of ice cream at a time, a little thing like muddling is just not the way to go.
It's just too dainty.
Too dainty. Yeah, very dainty.
All right, and then last question in this section, and then we'll get to the fun part. And that is on the bitters. And I know the Angostura is the typical kind of common what everyone has, but any thoughts on flavor bitters for this, or should you just kind of keep it traditional?
I'm seeing more orange bitters lately. That's gotten trendy recently for whatever reason. Again, I don't think it needs it, and frankly, most of my customers wouldn't want it. It's all about tradition here. People don't want new and different and trendy. They want the old standby. So certainly Angostura is the go-to here, and I don't think even if I had anything else on hand, people would want me to use it.
I have an old fashioned that's on our cocktail menu. It's not mine. That is it's going to be bourbon with orange bitters and then Demerara sugar syrup. It's super sweet, and then it's just orange. There's not even supposed to be a cherry in it. I mean, I add one just so that people won't freak out too much. That being said, and me and a bunch of bartenders have a lot of arguments about this. Say a margarita for me is tequila, Cointreau, lime juice, maybe salt. That's it. That's what the recipe is. When you add orange juice, when you add agave nectar, that makes it a variation of that drink. It is no longer the original iteration of that drink. Changing to an orange bitters, changing the fruit you put in it, adding something That's a variation. So the orange bitters, that is a thing, and people are starting to do that a little bit off and on for people like an even sweeter drinker. I could say, hey, why don't you try one of these that they make in Wisconsin? I'll bet you'll love this. So yeah, adding the orange and stuff makes a variation on the drink, but it's not really the drink we're discussing.
Fair enough.
I will say, as far as when you're talking bitters, at least Wisconsinites like a lot of it. You look it up on a guide, it'll say, a couple of dashes. I use a lot more than that, and people like it that way.
You have to. I mean, you've been doing it as long as I have. You had to have noticed how much different bitters are back from when we started to now. Used to be super strong, like 2 dashes of bitters, and you'd be like, oh. And now it's like I put 3, 4, 5, and it's like it's a subtle hint of bitters in the drink.
Yeah, years ago, if I didn't use it, people would just say, oh, can bring that bitters bottle over, let's add some more to that. So I go pretty heavy on it now, and I mean, I would say just to look at it, you should be able to eyeball it and see that it made the drink darker. If you can't tell that you put that in there, then you didn't put enough in there.
No, absolutely. Yeah, you've got to put enough bitters in to taste it.
I do have to say I do like a good bitters and soda when I'm the designated driver who's out, but I like bitter things.
Yeah, me too. Love Negronis, stuff like that.
I am more and more getting people asking me to just throw it into unrelated drinks too, which that didn't used to be a thing, but yeah, I get it a lot now.
For a long while, my kind of go-to cocktail was a Maker's and ginger ale with a splash of bitters. Opens it up.
Yeah, we get JMO and ginger a lot, and people ask for that.
Want to ask for a splash of bitters, yeah. When you do like the Jameson or whiskey version of a mule, you always add bitters to that to go with the ginger beer. I mean, it's part of that specific recipe.
On that, I think we're going to take another break here, but stay tuned. When we come back, we are going to attempt a demonstration. Definitely leave some comments below. I know there's all sorts of topics that we started to brush into that I'm sure people have opinions on. So, all right, we'll be right back.